Margaret Johnson was 42 years old when her world collapsed with the buzz of a single WhatsApp notification. She was in her office that afternoon, going through quarterly financial statements, when her sister-in-law Emily messaged her. The text was brief, but devastating. Margaret, I know it may be uncomfortable, but why did you decide not to come to my wedding? Robert told us you preferred to stay working that weekend. Margaret read the words over and over, her hands trembling. In an instant, the foundation of her 15-year marriage cracked. She had never refused to go to Emily's wedding. She hadn't even known the date had been set. To understand the depth of the betrayal, Margaret's story had to be traced back nearly 2 decades, to when she and Robert first met at Anderson Consulting in downtown Chicago. She was a newly graduated project manager, ambitious, full of energy and dreams. He was a star accountant, 3 years older, with soft, honey-colored eyes and a charming smile. From the beginning, Robert swept her off her feet. Every Friday he left flowers on her desk, accompanied by little handwritten notes. Their first date was in an upscale Italian restaurant, where he told her he dreamed of a traditional family but also admired strong, independent women. "You're exactly the kind of partner I always imagined," he had said, holding her hand across the table. Margaret believed him. For 2 years he celebrated every one of her achievements. When she confessed her dream of one day opening a boutique hotel, he encouraged her wholeheartedly. His family, however, was another matter. Robert's mother, a woman who had never worked outside her home, eyed Margaret with suspicion from the start. At their first dinner together, she asked with a condescending smile who would stay home with the children once they arrived. Margaret politely replied that modern couples could balance both family and careers, but the tension was unmistakable. Robert's younger sister Emily, then only 12, was the only one who seemed to admire Margaret, watching her with wide eyes filled with curiosity. Despite the mother's disapproval, Robert and Margaret married. Around that time, Margaret inherited a sum from her grandmother, a pioneering businesswoman. Using those funds, her own savings, and a bank loan, she purchased a rundown building in downtown Chicago and poured her soul into transforming it into a boutique hotel. She named it the Hope Boutique Hotel, honoring her grandmother's legacy. Robert supported her, though he insisted she keep the venture quiet from his family. "You know how my mother is," he said. "She'd think you're wasting money we should save for children." The first 5 years of their marriage were grueling as Margaret dedicated herself to building the hotel from scratch. She battled with permits, unreliable contractors, and untrained staff. But Robert, at least then, seemed supportive. He would greet her at home with wine when she returned exhausted, encouraging her to keep pushing. Slowly, her perseverance paid off. The hotel gained recognition, first in blogs, then in travel magazines, and finally in international guides, by its 7th year. The Hope Boutique Hotel was so successful that Margaret began rejecting offers from global chains. Yet, as her professional life soared, her marriage began to quietly unravel. Compliments from Robert turned into criticisms. His family's disapproval never waned. His mother constantly reminded her that a woman's real project was her home, not her business. Margaret endured countless Sunday lunches where she peeled potatoes while Robert's family dismissed her achievements. Robert never defended her, brushing off her complaints by saying his mother was simply from another generation. The breaking point arrived when the hotel was recognized among the 50 best boutique hotels in North America. Margaret hosted a celebration, inviting her staff, investors, and close friends. Robert showed up late, left early, and during her heartfelt toast, he was absorbed by his phone. When she asked later what was wrong, he confessed his mother was humiliated by her public success, insisting Margaret flaunted his money. Shocked, Margaret reminded him that the hotel was her work, her sweat, her dream. His only response was that she should be more discreet. That night they slept in separate rooms for the first time. Still, Margaret held on to her bond with Emily, who had always looked up to her. When Emily announced her engagement 6 months earlier, she begged Margaret to host the wedding at the Hope Boutique Hotel. Margaret not only agreed but became deeply involved in the planning. Delighted to help Emily, they spent afternoons poring over menus and floral arrangements. In those moments, Margaret felt like she truly had a sister. Emily even asked tenderly why she and Robert had no children. Margaret swallowed her pain. For years, they had tried enduring fertility treatments, miscarriages, and finally the crushing truth that Robert's infertility was the cause. But to his family, Robert had painted a different picture, one in which Margaret had prioritized her career over motherhood. For his pride, she never contradicted him. That made Emily's warmth all the more precious. Emily promised Margaret would one day be godmother to her children. It was a fragile lifeline in a family where Margaret otherwise felt like an outsider. Which was why the WhatsApp message hit like a lightning strike. Emily believed Margaret had chosen work over the wedding at her own hotel. No less. With shaking fingers, Margaret clarified she had never even received the confirmed date. Emily's response froze her blood. Robert had picked up the invitation weeks earlier, claiming he wanted to surprise her. Then later called to say she would not attend because of work. Worse, he had told Emily that Margaret had scheduled a corporate event at the hotel that same weekend, choosing her career over family. It was all a lie. Margaret knew something darker was at play. She asked Emily to keep their conversation secret while she investigated. Soon, the truth began to surface. Linda, her trusted assistant, confirmed Robert had altered the guest list, removing Margaret's name and replacing it with Jessica Miller, a finance manager from his company. He had even reserved a bridal suite under the alias J. Miller. Security footage later showed Robert sneaking Jessica into the hotel multiple times. 15 years of marriage came crashing down as Margaret pieced together the betrayal. Robert hadn't merely lied, he had planned to parade another woman at his sister's wedding in Margaret's own hotel, while erasing her entirely from the picture. The anguish inside her turned into something colder, sharper fury and determination. This was no longer just about heartbreak. It was about dignity, truth, and reclaiming the respect she had always deserved. That night, Robert came home at 10:00 p.m., loosening his tie as if nothing were wrong. Margaret sat in the living room with a glass of wine, the television flickering in front of her. He leaned down to give her a superficial kiss on the cheek and asked casually how her day had gone. She forced a smile and answered with equal calm, concealing the storm inside her when she asked him about his day. He sighed dramatically, claiming his important project was finally wrapping up over the weekend. He added that maybe he would spend some time at the club with his brother Michael. His words stung like ice. He was lying without hesitation, looking her straight in the eyes. Margaret tested him. She mentioned Emily's wedding, hinting at how they should ask about the date in order to block the hotel for the reception. Robert waved the idea away quickly, saying Emily and David were considering other places because her hotel was too expensive, even with a discount. The excuse was laughable. Margaret had already promised Emily a massive family discount, and Emily had been thrilled. She knew Robert's story was nothing but cover. She decided not to press further, simply telling him she was tired and going to bed. Once upstairs, she didn't sleep. Instead, she began to plan. The next 2 days were consumed with preparation. Margaret collected evidence, documenting Robert's betrayal meticulously. Linda confirmed the payment for Jessica's suite had been made on their joint credit card, an insult that cut deeper than any words. To remove any doubt, Margaret hired a private investigator, The report was swift and devastating. Robert and Jessica had been carrying on their affair for 6 months, meeting at hotels, restaurants, and her apartment. Jessica, as it turned out, was married to a traveling businessman who left her with ample free time. The investigator even provided photographs of Robert buying Jessica a diamond necklace, something he had never once purchased for Margaret in their entire marriage. 2 nights before the wedding, Margaret's phone rang. It was Robert's mother. Her voice carried its usual cold disapproval as she accused Margaret of causing drama by calling Emily to complain about not being invited. Margaret bit her tongue, holding back the truth. She wasn't going to let Robert's mother be the first to hear the scandal. Instead, she agreed curtly, telling her that perhaps she was not the wife Robert deserved. That night, Robert returned earlier than usual, restless and uneasy. After pouring himself whiskey, he announced that he needed space for the weekend to think about their marriage. The audacity nearly made Margaret laugh out loud. He was asking her to step aside so he could bring Jessica to Emily's wedding without resistance. Margaret played along until she could no longer. Calmly, she confronted him, saying she knew about Emily's wedding and about Jessica. At first, Robert's face drained of color, then quickly shifted to anger. His confession was venomous. Yes, he was with Jessica. She made him feel like a man. He spat. Not like the failed husband of the great businesswoman Margaret. He accused her of overshadowing him, of making him feel small. Margaret's fury boiled over. She reminded him of the countless sacrifices she had made hiding his infertility, enduring his family's scorn, financing his family's needs through her own hard work. Everything he had dismissed as her career had, in fact, sustained his family. Robert tried to salvage ground, suggesting they could still talk things over. Margaret cut him short. She revealed she had already frozen their joint accounts and canceled the suite he reserved for Jessica. She told him bluntly she was filing for divorce. His shocked silence was answer enough. That night, she checked herself into her own hotel, moving into the presidential suite. She stood on the balcony with a glass of wine, staring out at the glowing city. The grief was sharp, but beneath it pulsed a deeper realization she hadn't lost 15 years. She had invested them in building something no one could take away from her. The following day was Friday, the eve of the wedding. Margaret oversaw preparations at the hotel with professional precision. By 3:00 p.m., Robert arrived with Jessica, both smiling smugly. Margaret watched through security cameras as they tried and failed to check into the canceled suite, forced to settle for a standard room. Their laughter rang hollow in her ears. Soon after, the Johnson family began to arrive. Mrs. Johnson in an expensive new dress, Michael with his family, and Emily glowing with excitement. From her office, Margaret could see everything but remained invisible. She noticed Emily glancing toward the doors repeatedly, no doubt hoping Margaret would appear. That evening, while eating alone in her suite, Margaret received a threatening message from an unknown number. "I know who you are. Stay away from the wedding tomorrow, or there will be consequences." It was Jessica. Margaret replied firmly, "Don't worry, I won't ruin Emily's wedding. But after tomorrow, you will both face the consequences." Saturday dawned bright and beautiful, a perfect day for a wedding. From her balcony, Margaret watched as florists placed final touches, the kitchen prepared dishes, and musicians rehearsed. At 2:40 p.m., Emily arrived radiant, surrounded by her bridesmaids. At 5:00 p.m., the ceremony began. Margaret could hear the music floating up from the gardens, the murmur of vows, the soft sobs of guests. She cried too, not just for what she had lost, but for what could never be reclaimed. Later, when the reception began at 7:00 p.m., laughter and music filled the hotel. Margaret ventured briefly into the kitchen through the service entrance, speaking with the chef to ensure everything was perfect. But before she could leave, she overheard Robert and Jessica's voices. Jessica was praising the hotel, marveling at its beauty. Robert responded bitterly that Margaret had only gotten lucky with inheritance, that anyone could have done what she did. Margaret almost revealed herself, but she stayed hidden, trembling with anger. Then Jessica's tone shifted. When Robert admitted the hotel was never legally his, her voice hardened with contempt. She mocked him, sneering that she had left her wealthy husband for a man with nothing to offer. Her cruel laughter echoed as she stormed away, leaving Robert humiliated. Margaret slipped back upstairs, champagne in hand, savoring the bitter irony. Karma had done its work. Robert had destroyed his marriage for a woman who never cared for him. By the time the night ended, his mistress had abandoned him, and his family would soon see his betrayal for what it was. At 10:00 p.m., when the wedding celebration was at its peak, Margaret's phone rang. It was Emily, her voice trembling with urgency. "Margaret, I know you said you wouldn't come, but I need to see you, please. I'm in the Rose Garden." The Rose Garden was Margaret's personal refuge on the hotel grounds. She hesitated, but Emily's tone left her no choice, slipping quietly from her suite. She walked through the dimly lit paths until she found Emily sitting on a bench, her wedding dress glowing softly under the moonlight. Tears streaked her face. Emily leapt up and embraced Margaret tightly. "I know everything," she whispered through sobs. She explained that David had seen Robert and Jessica kissing in a hallway. When confronted, Robert couldn't deny it. Emily was devastated, ashamed that her brother had brought such disgrace into her wedding. "Margaret, I'm so sorry," she cried. "I should have defended you all those years when Mom criticized you. I should have realized what Robert was doing. You are my sister, the sister I always wanted, and I failed you." Margaret held her close, stroking her back. "No, Emily. None of this is your fault. You've been the only light in that family for me. Don't blame yourself for Robert's choices." Emily told her that Mrs. Johnson was furious not with Margaret, but with Robert. The revelation that Jessica was already married, and that she had been using Robert for his perceived wealth, had finally shattered the mother's blind adoration of her son. Inside the reception hall, Mrs. Johnson was reportedly berating Robert in front of guests. For the first time, he was the one drowning under his family's disapproval. With pleading eyes, Emily asked, "Margaret, will you come inside with me? Please. I want everyone to know you are my family. You're my sister, no matter what Robert has done." Margaret hesitated. She didn't want to cast a shadow over Emily's day, but the raw sincerity in Emily's voice broke through her walls. She took her hand, and together they walked into the reception hall. The moment they entered, silence swept the room. All eyes turned toward them. Margaret saw Robert slumped in a corner, his shirt wrinkled, his face pale with defeat. Mrs. Johnson stood nearby, her face carved with fury and shame. Jessica was gone. Emily led Margaret to the center and took the microphone. Her voice trembled at first but soon gained strength. "Family, friends. This is my sister Margaret. She is the woman who opened the doors of this beautiful hotel for us, who stood by me in every moment of preparation, and who has endured more than anyone should. If anyone has a problem with her presence here, they may leave." The applause began softly, from David, then his parents, then spreading across the hall until everyone was clapping, many with tears in their eyes. Even Michael, usually so reserved, joined in. Mrs. Johnson slowly approached. For the first time in 15 years, Margaret saw something new in her eyes: regret. In a voice quieter than anyone had ever heard from her, she said, "Margaret, I have no words. I was a fool. I poisoned myself with bitterness and poisoned my son, too. You gave more to this family than I ever acknowledged. I am sorry." Margaret's throat tightened. For years, she had longed for even a shred of recognition. Yet hearing it now, she felt no triumph, only weariness. "Mrs. Johnson," she said calmly, "the damage is already done." The older woman nodded. "I know, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I see the truth now. You are a better person than any of us deserves." Margaret didn't reply. She simply stepped back, unwilling to grant forgiveness but accepting the closure the moment offered. The rest of the night passed in a haze. Margaret danced with David, chatted with friends, and even posed for photos. Robert disappeared at some point, his presence swallowed by the humiliation of the evening. Margaret didn't care. By midnight, when the party was winding down, Emily found her again. She hugged Margaret tightly. "Thank you for everything, for the hotel, for being here, for being you. You will always be my sister." Margaret smiled, her eyes misting. "And you will always be mine. Don't let what Robert did taint your happiness. Focus on your marriage, your future. Leave the rest to me and my lawyers." The weeks that followed were filled with legal battles. Robert attempted to claim rights to the hotel, arguing he had contributed emotional support that helped Margaret succeed. His lawyers couldn't keep straight faces once confronted with evidence: the security footage, the altered guest lists, the credit card charges for Jessica, and testimony from guests who witnessed his public indiscretion. The court stripped him of any claims. Instead, he was ordered to compensate Margaret for the financial damage caused by his affair. Jessica, meanwhile, crawled back to her husband, who forgave her under a rigid post-nuptial agreement. Robert was left with nothing, living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, his reputation in ruins both professionally and socially. Mrs. Johnson attempted to make amends, sending flowers and handwritten apologies. Even visiting the hotel once, Margaret wasn't ready to accept her. Perhaps she never would. Surprisingly, Michael reached out, apologizing for his silence over the years. He testified on Margaret's behalf during the divorce, and quietly began repairing his relationship with her. Emily remained her greatest ally. She and David visited the hotel regularly, and when Emily announced her pregnancy, Margaret was the first to know, true to her word. Emily asked Margaret to be the godmother. Tears of joy filled Margaret's eyes. She had lost a husband, but she had gained a family where it mattered. Through it all, the Hope Boutique Hotel continued to flourish. Margaret even opened a second location in Miami. Along the way, she met someone new, an architect involved in the expansion project. Unlike Robert, he admired her ambition and celebrated her achievements. His presence was a quiet, healing balm. Looking back, Margaret no longer saw those 15 years with Robert as wasted. They had been lessons. She learned that love without respect is fragile, that sacrifice without reciprocity destroys rather than strengthens, and that a woman should never dim her light for someone else's comfort. Months turned into a year, and Margaret found herself in a new chapter of life that felt both unfamiliar and liberating. The divorce had finalized with clarity. Robert walked away, stripped of claims, and Margaret retained not only her hotel, but also her peace of mind. The public humiliation at Emily's wedding had exposed his deceit to everyone who once praised him, and the fallout was swift. Old friends distanced themselves, colleagues lost respect, and even his own family could no longer shield him. Margaret, meanwhile, continued to rise, her name synonymous with excellence in the boutique hotel industry. She threw herself into expanding the Hope Boutique Hotel brand, pouring the same dedication into her Miami project as she had with the original Chicago location. Long hours no longer felt like sacrifice, but like devotion to something truly hers: Unlike before, there was no husband waiting at home with criticism disguised as concern. Her life now pulsed with freedom. One evening, while overseeing final touches on the Miami property, Margaret had dinner with Daniel, the architect who had become more than a colleague. He was kind and thoughtful. The kind of man who asked about her dreams without flinching at their size. Where Robert once felt diminished by her success, Daniel celebrated it for the first time. Margaret experienced what it meant to be loved without conditions. There were no daggers hidden behind compliments, no silent punishments for outshining him, just two equals, walking side by side. Yet Margaret knew her story wasn't only about new love or even success. It was about survival, self-respect, and finally understanding that her worth had never been tied to Robert's validation or anyone else's. She reflected on how long she had allowed herself to shrink in order to fit into a mold of what a wife was supposed to be. She had endured humiliation in silence, protected Robert's pride at the expense of her own happiness, and absorbed the poison of his family's disdain. But in the end, the betrayal had forced her to shed those chains. One afternoon, as she sat in the garden of her Chicago hotel, sipping tea with Emily, she confessed, "I used to think losing Robert would destroy me. I thought my identity was tied to being his wife. But the truth is, losing him saved me." Emily reached over and squeezed her hand. "You've always been more than enough. It just took him leaving for you to finally see it." Emily's words lingered. Later, Margaret realized the greatest revenge she had was not in court documents or financial victories, but in the simple act of thriving. Robert's life had shrunk into bitterness, while hers had expanded into fulfillment. The last time she saw him, he was sitting alone at a cafe across from her hotel, staring up at the building with hollow eyes. When he spotted her, he raised his hand in a timid wave. She didn't wave back. She simply turned and walked through the revolving doors of her hotel, the world she had built brick by brick, dream by dream. Without him, in her heart, there was no gloating, only a deep, quiet sense of closure. Robert had made his choices. She had made hers. And the contrast between their lives was all the justice she needed. Margaret began sharing her story more openly, both with friends and through quiet reflections at her hotel's events. She wanted women, especially those told to dim their light, for others to know that their dreams mattered. She wanted them to understand that marriage without respect was a prison, and that real love should never demand silence or sacrifice of the soul. The Hope Boutique Hotel became not just a business, but a symbol. Guests often asked about the name, and Margaret always explained it was dedicated to her grandmother. But deep down, she also knew it represented her own journey through loss, betrayal, and ultimately, rebirth. Sometimes, when she looked back on the night of Emily's wedding, she remembered standing on that balcony, listening to the laughter below, her heart heavy with sorrow. If she could whisper to that version of herself now, she would tell her, "Hold on. The storm is clearing. What comes after will be brighter than you ever imagined." And she was right. Margaret had not only survived, she had flourished. She had become proof that sometimes the most painful endings are also the most necessary beginnings. So, to anyone listening to her story, she had one message: never shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort. Your light doesn't burn too brightly, it simply shines where it's meant to. And if someone cannot stand the glow, it only means they were never meant to stand beside you. If Margaret's journey touched you, remember to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of strength and resilience. And don't forget to leave a comment below. I would love to know if you've ever faced something similar, and how you found your own light again.